Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the panel that will deal with the analysis of two major issues with regards to the development of hydrocarbons in the East Mediterranean. The title of our panel is introducing us to a debate, which is a very important one and has been a part of the overall strategic debate and analysis within the European Union, which is trying to see the future role of hydrocarbons into the prospective drastic changes of the European energy mix to 2050. The simple line of analysis would be, is there a link? Is the development of hydrocarbons sustainable over a long-term perspective of decarbonization of the energy mix of Europe within the context of the Green Deal of 2019 and the specific strategies that have been drawn out from the European Commission and the member states to get to a point by 2050 where at least 1/3 of the European final energy demand would be covered by renewable energy. So this is basic, and that is of course a concept, a major debate concept, which also deals with, introduces us to the concept of a shut-in or stranded assets capacity that has influenced the overall policy options and decision-making mechanisms and priorities of several institutions within the European Union, but also international financial institutions that have decided to phase out their financial support for the development of a natural gas, both on the upstream as well as, interestingly enough, on the midstream sector. This is an overgoing debate which doesn't have a uniform opinion. Different member states follow very different approaches and have different ideas and different priorities, which are indicative of the national idiosyncrasies of different EU member states, especially between Western, Northwestern Europe and Eastern and Southeastern Europe. So my first question in welcoming our guests for this panel would be, do you see a future? How do you perceive essentially the role of hydrocarbons in this long-term vision of the EU energy greening mix? Are they compatible? Or given the fact that we're still, especially in Cyprus and in Greece, a long time away from beginning of production, by the time production begins, is there still going to be a market for oil and gas for European Union countries? And how compatible is these developments in the longer term, especially since some states within the European Union, like Spain, for example, recently decided to phase out and basically to terminate the continuation of exploration and exploitation permits for its offshore reserves. So this is the first question I'd like to put to all of you, and I'd like to thank you again for your participation. We hope to have a very interesting discussion. Who would like to go first? Mr. Stefatos, perhaps? Dr. Stefatos, perhaps?
Thank you, Mr. Tsakis, and thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be a part of this panel of distinguished participants. I think for me, the question is a very simple one, and it has to do with the estimation of what is the price in the area. You know, it doesn't have to be our own estimations and expectations, but I will just refer to the USGS, the US Geological Survey. They estimate the area of the East Med holds gas reserves of about 65 billion barrels of oil equivalent, to make it relevant as a number, which is estimated that it could be a value potential in the order of $3 billion. So the price is huge, and this is a price that nobody can overlook. When it comes to do we need the gas? I have to say, and forgive my bold statement or the very direct statement. The last time I checked, there is only one reliable transition fuel for the green shift, and this is the gas. So to this day, we do not have an alternative, reliable solution that we can say, yes, this is definitely something we can use. We have a lot of expectation. We have a lot of developments and we will continue on the developments. And to be honest, I am sure that these developments will mature and will deliver technologies that we will be able to use. But realistically speaking, and we have to be realistic when it comes to energy, because energy is an essential element of our communities, of our societies. We do not have a better solution than gas. And gas, together with the negative CO2 technologies, is actually a very interesting proposition. It is a proposition that it can be deployed immediately. By deploying it immediately and substituting, more other technologies or other fossil fuels, we can start reducing the CO2 emissions. By developing the gas, we build the necessary infrastructure to welcome one of the most promising future technologies, which would be the hydrogen. And by doing so, we achieve a lot of things. We achieve we make the energy transition, we make the green shift a reality. And we make it a reality by making it affordable to the societies, which is a very important element of the discussion, which I think sometimes we overlook it. Right now, the approach we are having increases the energy cost. Through the gas, we can keep the cost on a controllable level, on an acceptable level. We can actually reduce the CO2 emissions immediately, and we can also prepare for hosting the fuels of the future, the non-carbon fuels of the future. So for me, it is a matter of it's more a matter of how we're going to do it and when exactly it's going to happen, and not an if it will happen.
Thank you very much. Mr. Dr. Fesas, please. Would you like to?
Thanks also to the organizers for the invitation to participate this year. And it's somewhat a provocative question regarding is it too late for East Med Hydrocarbons in the EU? And I'll touch on some of the same points that Mr. Stefatos has mentioned, but giving it from a Cyprus context. So in Cyprus specifically, when we refer to hydrocarbons, we're referring to natural gas, the deposits that have been discovered, and the ongoing appraisal and exploration. And as Mr. Tsakiris mentioned, our expectations are for the production and export of these projects to start from 2026 onwards. In terms of what is going to be the demand for natural gas in the EU, from the EU's own projections to 2030, natural gas demand is going to remain at the same levels, around 500 BCM. And then with projections to 2050, where there is a significant reduction in these projections based on the aggressive energy transition policies, the demand, even with these aggressive energy transition policies, would still be 250 to 300 BCM. So that's still a very significant market. For Cyprus's gas exports, these can also be marketed to nearby markets such as Egypt or to global markets via liquefaction facilities. Coming back to the gas market of the EU, obviously in the coming decades, this is going to be defined by these energy transition policies. The focus on fossil fuels has been to targeting the emissions and applying carbon pricing through emissions allowances. The policies that are coming through are still supporting carbon capture and storage solutions. And as Mr. Stefanos mentioned, natural gas is going to have a role to play in actually kickstarting the bridge towards the renewable hydrocarbon systems of the future. As some further food for thought on this is, as these policies are matured over time, it might be mature to include further detailed assessment of the whole greenhouse gas footprint pre-combustion. And that would include for natural gas CO2 emissions and methane emissions, with methane being 80 times more potent than CO2 as a greenhouse gas. LNG, for example, has a larger CO2 footprint than pipeline transportation. And also for pipeline supply, there's different levels of controls on methane leakage from source countries. With the EU continuing to have significant demand for natural gas, it's important to create a more level playing field for supplies of natural gas, focusing also on the supply chain greenhouse gas emissions. And specifically for Cyprus, at the beginning of its journey to being a natural gas producer as well as an EU member state, it can aspire to be the cleanest producer and supplier of natural gas, and by doing so, add to its competitiveness in the long term for supply to the EU. That's some additional food for thought, Mr. Tsakiris and Mr. Stefanos.
Thank you very much. I think that both of you made very salient arguments within this regard by presenting the point of view of the industry. Within the European Union, the debate is ongoing, and you see that affecting several aspects of the overall EU energy strategy, including that with the use of the natural gas and grid infrastructure, anywhere from transmission to distribution to storage, the way that you would link or retrofit that infrastructure with the future hydrogen economy and how they would be interrelated, the interconnectivity and flexibility and sustainability and reliability of connections between the electricity grid and the natural gas grid, and all other aspects which are, of course, very important in this continuing debate. And I think that, there is now a rebalancing act which is happening, which I believe may lead under specific conditions to a better to more comprehensive reflection of the challenges that you've just mentioned, especially for those sectors of the energy mix and the energy demand, which are extremely hard to abate with greenhouse gas emissions if you would only use renewable electricity, even if you had resolved the major problem, the major challenge of renewable electricity, which is its intermittency. Apart from the general debate on the greening of the energy mix and whether that strategy is going to strand assets, hydrocarbon assets, both in terms of the upstream, midstream, and downstream sectors of the business, there is another reason which is behind the anxiety or the unacceptability to a certain extent, or the perception of unacceptability, to be more accurate, within different societies of hydrocarbon exploration. And I'm referring to the fact that it is perceived, it is considered as an operation which is extremely risky, which could lead to accidents. And by furthering the argument of those groups within different European societies, that this could create conditions of a major accident that could lead to an environmental catastrophe. And to summarize their argument is that we should stop exploration and production in the Mediterranean, especially since the Mediterranean is a closed sea, because nobody wants to go through another catastrophe like Macondo. Nobody wants a European Macondo, essentially, of what happened, referring to the 2010 accident with BP in the Gulf of Mexico, which has been to date the most important, the most impactful environmental catastrophe. So one of the questions is, to what extent would you think that, what are the strategies in place at the EU level, but also at the national level, to ease those fears? Are we, compared to 2010, what has changed? Are we more secure in this regard? and what measures are there in place at the union as well as the national level, to deal with these potential crises or potential accidents? I'd like to start by giving the floor to Mr. Collu, who is the extremely relevant to the issue at hand, if he would like to take this question first and present us with his views. Thank you very much, sir.
Yes, thank you. Before we turn to the question of offshore safety, let me say a few sentences regarding the energy policy and climate policy of the European Commission and member states. It is very clear that all forces are somehow joined to reduce the consumption of fossil fuels at short notice and fully at long term. So that means all fossil fuels are covered, coal, oil, and gas as well. And there are many measures, many means to achieve this goal. You have mentioned already the CO2 price. There are all kinds of taxes, emission targets for cars, and so on. So in the long run, fossil fuels will be phased out, I'm sure. And that means, of course, that the oil and gas, sale of oil and gas have an issue in the long run in the European Union. Of course, it will never be possible to fully phase out oil and gas. There will be some residual consumption, certainly for transport, not only in the aviation, not only for planes as well, for some other kinds of transports, for marine transports. And but it will have a big impact. The policies, energy policies, will have a very big impact on the demand for oil and gas in the European Union. But of course, oil and gas is a kind of commodity. There are different qualities, but nevertheless, it's sold worldwide. It's a global market. And I think there is a certain demand worldwide for fossil fuels, which will remain for a very, very long time, in particular in Asia, South America. And oil and gas is traded worldwide to have LNG, the possibility to have LNG. Cyprus, for example, could export its gas in the form of LNG worldwide. Everything will, of course, depend from the prices and the cost of production. Although oil is a global market, there are many additional points to take into account. We have seen these large swings of oil price in 2020. In the moment, it's again, oil price, the barrel is again around $60, what is absolutely a lot. But it depends very much not only from the demand side, but as well from the offer side, from the production side, what price you can achieve. And there we have the OPEC in place, the policy of Russia, and others. So to summarize, in the EU, I don't see too much perspectives for oil and gas in the long run, but on a global level, I assume that oil and gas will stay for certainly many decades still, so that there is the possibility to market these commodities in coming decades. So coming back now to your initial question regarding offshore safety, you mentioned the Macondo major accident. Probably many of us have even seen this the movie about the accident and have now a rather good view what can happen on such an installation. The EU put in place legislation to make offshore oil and gas production as safe as possible. We have the Offshore Safe Directive in place now for many years. However, there was a transitional period for the industry to apply all provisions of the directive as implemented by member states. And this transitional period finished only 19 July 2018. So there is still only a few years long experience now with the Offshore Safe Directive and how it works in practice. We had certainly some accidents or incidents in the EU with the potential to develop to a major accident, but in recent years we had no full-blown major accidents with big explosions or large-scale pollution. So in the moment, it appears that we are not only lucky, but as well that the provisions of the Offshore Safety Directive work quite well. Only recently, the Commission has finalized an assessment of the implementation of the Offshore Safety Directive. The result was rather positive, and there are a few remaining issues, of course, to follow up. Only a brief summary. There are three main issues. One is the question of harmonization of liability and the question whether procedures in member states to compensate victims of accidents and to clean up the sea again are adequate. So there's this area, liability compensation and financial security of offshore operators and owners. A certain area is still decommissioning of offshore installations. There were in particular questions regarding the United Kingdom. United Kingdom now left the European Union, so we have to look on this issue from a different angle and perspective.
I have to apologize. Excuse me, I have to apologize for interrupting you, but it appears we're running out of time. So if you have a brief statement on your conclusions, yes, and the other two gentlemen could take up their own answers. I'm sorry for the interruption.
Yes. I only wanted to close with the third point, which needs to be addressed, and this is the mutual recognition of offshore installations when they move to different jurisdictions. So to summarize, experiences are rather good. We need to closely follow this in the coming years, and there are some remaining issues which we intend to address in the next future.
Dr. Fesas, please.
Yes.
Would you like to briefly comment on this?
Briefly from the comment from Dr. Coley, the activities that have been happening, especially in Cyprus EEZ. We've been lucky enough in Cyprus to attract major oil and gas companies in Cyprus to conduct these activities that take a responsible approach to the work for the drilling activities, overlaid with this regulatory approach from the EU. And as Dr. Coley said, the results and the posture and the responsibility in this area has been very good in the EU. Turning to the original question regarding the East Med Hydrocarbons in the EU, our activities in Cyprus are continuing. We're on track to deliver on our natural gas projects, and we're hopeful we're going to be in a good place to compete in the EU market and also in global markets for our natural gas.
Thank you, Dr. Fesas. Dr. Stefatos, you have the floor and closing remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'll start with a comment. I think it was an unfortunate choice of words. I don't think safety is a matter of luck in the oil and gas industry. It's not that we have been lucky and we didn't have accidents. Accidents in the oil and gas industry have a high toll of human life, among other things. And the oil and gas industry is extremely, and I have to emphasize that, cautious and serious about preventing them. The Macondo accident that was mentioned earlier, it's a very unfortunate consequence of a number of poor choices and bad decisions. These things do not happen easily. And we should say that if the European standards were applied, probably most of the accident would have, at least an element of the accident would have been prevented. So let's not deal with it with a lightness about, if we are lucky, maybe we will not have an accident or not. It's an extremely important and serious issue. The oil and gas industry has been learning a lot, has paid the price. It's a heavy toll that it has paid over more than 100 years. And it is developed into one of the most safe, in a way, if you consider all the risks associated with it, on a daily basis, on a day-to-day, on a minute-to-minute, on a second-to-second operations with systems under pressure explosive systems. And I think, when it's done in a proper way, then it's done in a very safe way. The second thing I would like to mention, I think for me it puzzles me. I hear about talking about phasing out the fossil fuels. Unless I'm mistaken, the concern is the climate, and the concern is the CO2. So what we need to do, and we should not lose focus. It's not about the fossil fuels. It's about turning around the climate change, stopping the CO2. If we find ways to stop the CO2s, then the fossil fuels is not the enemy. I know that in the EU Commission, a lot of people talk about it's like the fossil fuels is the worst thing that has happened to the world. Actually, it is the thing that has developed us as societies and has brought us to where we are today. We're still going to need the plastics. We do not have solutions to everything. The reason why the oil and gas industry exists and the fossil fuels exist is because humans need it. The society needs it. So let's not be overly, unrealistic in what we are talking on a daily basis, and let's find a way how we do it in a smart way, in an effective way. If we have technologies that reduce the CO2 and we can revert the climate change, then what's the problem? Of course, I can understand that there are countries who are very dependent on importing fossil fuels. So these are things that we should, we should understand, and we should pay attention to that. And I'm very sensitive to that. But if we can reduce the dependencies on imports from other nations outside the EU, and if we can do it in an environmentally and a social, in the best possible way to protect the wealth of the EU citizens and protect our environment, the global environment, then we should not be overly negative to the idea. And
okay,
I think this is an element of the future that we should pay more and more attention as we move forward.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll have to leave it at that. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. Dr. Colley, Dr. Fesas, and Dr. Stefatos, thank you very much for your participation in this interesting panel, and all the best to all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.